The Villisca Ax Murders. 8 souls claimed by darkness. In the heart of America's farmland, where corn whispers secrets to the wind and railroad tracks slice through endless fields, stands a house that has witnessed unspeakable horror. This is 508 East 2nd Street in Villisca, Iowa, a place where innocence died on a summer night in 1912, and where 8 souls were claimed by a methodical killer who vanished into the darkness like smoke. Tonight, we descend into one of America's most terrifying unsolved mysteries, where a children's church program became a prelude to massacre, and where the dead still walk the halls of the house that claimed their lives. When innocence walked into shadow, June 9th, 1912. A bright Sunday morning in Villisca, Iowa. Population 2,500 souls living in blissful ignorance of the horror that would unfold before dawn. The Methodist church bells ring at 9:30 a.m., calling the faithful to worship in this peaceful farming community where doors remain unlocked and children play safely in tree-lined streets. But something sinister is already stirring in the shadows. 2 young sisters, Lena and Ina Stillinger, ages 12 and 8, walk the 2.5 miles from their family's wealthy farm into town for Sunday school. Their father, Joseph Stillinger, watches from his field as his daughters disappear down the dusty road. It will be the last time he sees them alive. At the same time, a mysterious figure arrives in Villisca. Reverend Lynn George Kelly, a 40-year-old English-born minister with piercing blue eyes and a history of mental illness, steps off the train to teach at the Presbyterian Church's Children's Day service. Standing only 5'2" and weighing barely 115 pounds, this red-haired stranger carries secrets darker than the Iowa soil. Unknown to the townspeople, Kelly has been diagnosed with schizophrenia and has a disturbing reputation as a peeping Tom who asks young women to pose nude. Later, he will claim that God himself commanded him to slay utterly, a biblical phrase that will haunt investigators for decades. The Last Supper of Innocence. As the sun sets on June 9th, the Moore family gathers for what will be their final evening together. Josiah Moore, 43, a successful businessman whose rivalry with a powerful enemy has placed him in mortal danger, sits at the dinner table with his beloved wife, Sarah, 39, and their 4 children, Herman, 11, Catherine, 10, Boyd, 7, and little Paul, 5. The Moore house at 508 East 2nd Street is a modest 2-story frame home, 600 square feet of what should have been safety, but what will become a slaughterhouse. The house had been quarantined for smallpox twice before this night, as if death itself had been testing the boundaries, preparing for its grand entrance. Josiah Moore is a marked man, though he doesn't know it. 5 years earlier, he had worked for Frank F. Jones, the most powerful man in Villisca, a state senator, banker, and businessman who wielded his influence like a weapon. When Moore left Jones's employ in 1907 to start his own competing business, taking the lucrative John Deere dealership with him, he signed his family's death warrant. By 1912, the 2 men crossed the street to avoid each other, their hatred simmering like a poison in the small town's veins. At 6 p.m., Josiah calls the Stillinger farm. The 2 young sisters have spent the day in town, preparing for the evening's Children's Day program at the Presbyterian Church. With innocent excitement, they receive permission to stay overnight with the Moore family, a sleepover that will become their tomb. The gathering storm. As darkness approaches, the families gather at the Presbyterian Church for what should be a celebration of faith and childhood innocence. At exactly 8 p.m., the church bells ring, and the Children's Day program begins in a sanctuary packed with the entire community. Sarah Moore had coordinated this special end-of-year Sunday school program, featuring the town's children in recitations and speeches. Little Paul Moore, only 5 years old, gives his lisping recitation that delights his father. "And Jesus loved even me." These will be among the last words the child ever speaks. In the congregation sits Reverend Kelly, his pale blue eyes scanning the crowd from across the aisle from Joe Moore. Later, witnesses will remember how Kelly seemed to study the Moore family with an intensity that made them uncomfortable. Unknown to everyone present, Kelly has been claiming to hear divine voices commanding him to follow the shadow. At 9:30 p.m., the program ends. The Moores linger in the church while flower bouquets are prepared for the sick and shut-in members of the community. A final act of Christian charity before they meet their fate. The walk into darkness. Between 9:45 and 10 p.m., the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters begin their final journey, a short walk from the church to 508 East 2nd Street. The children chatter excitedly about the evening's performance, while their parents discuss the flowers they'll deliver to sick community members the next day. They arrive home after 10 p.m. and enjoy cookies and milk before heading to bed. The parents retire to the upstairs master bedroom. The 4 more children settle into the adjacent upstairs room, and Lena and Ina Stillinger are given the downstairs guest bedroom. By 11 o'clock p.m., the house is quiet. 8 innocent souls drifting into sleep, unaware that death is already waiting in the shadows above their heads. In the sweltering attic, where spent cigarettes will later be found, a killer crouches in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the family settling into their final slumber. The murderer has been waiting, possibly for hours, watching through a knothole in the barn where investigators will later find the impression of a human body pressed into the hay. Meanwhile, at the Ewing house where he's staying, Reverend Kelly holds evening devotions and retires for the night. His hosts set his alarm clock for 4:30 a.m. He has claimed he must catch the early westbound train, though no one has asked him to leave. The hour of slaughter. At the stroke of midnight, evil incarnate begins its methodical work. The killer enters through the unlocked back door. Doors commonly remained unlocked in small towns of 1912. A trust that becomes a fatal vulnerability, moving with the silence of a predator. The murderer takes an oil lamp from a dresser, removes the glass chimney, and bends the wick in two to create only the faintest light, just enough to see the victims' faces as they die. The killing begins upstairs in the master bedroom, where Josiah and Sarah Moore sleep peacefully in their bed. Josiah is struck first. The axe swings with such savage force that it gouges the ceiling above the bed, plaster raining down like snow on the blood-soaked sheets. Sarah awakens to see her husband's head caved in, but before she can scream, the axe finds her skull, creating inch-deep gashes in her face. But the killer is not finished with the parents. After completing the methodical slaughter of the children, the murderer returns to deliver additional savage blows to the already dead couple. Josiah Moore's head is struck an estimated 30 times, beaten until it becomes an unrecognizable mass of blood and bone. In the adjacent room, 4 children sleep their last sleep. Herman, 11, Catherine, 10, Boyd, 7, and little Paul, 5. Each is struck down with the blunt end of the axe as they lie in their beds, their young lives snuffed out, without a chance to understand what is happening to them. Finally, the killer descends the stairs to the guest bedroom, where Lena and Ina Stillinger rest. Only Lena, 12 years old, shows signs of having awakened. She is found lying crosswise on the bed with what appears to be a defensive wound on her arm, the only victim who may have seen her killer's face in those final, terrifying moments. Her nightgown is found bunched around her waist, positioned to expose her genitalia, evidence of the sexual depravity that motivated this massacre. The killer has saved the eldest girl for last, fulfilling his twisted desire before ending her young life. But here's where our story takes a turn into the truly terrifying, where the natural world ends and something else begins. If you're brave enough to continue this journey with us every week, hit subscribe and that notification bell right now, because after what you're about to hear, you'll understand why some houses should never be entered after dark. You see, the Villisca house didn't remain empty after the murders. Something stayed behind. The ritual of the damned. What happens next reveals the true depth of the killer's madness and depravity. This is not a crime of passion, but a methodical ritual performed by a mind consumed with darkness. Every mirror in the house is covered with sheets, towels, or clothing, a practice associated with wakes and funerals. As if the killer cannot bear to see his own reflection after the atrocity he has committed. Every window is covered with curtains, blinds, or clothing to prevent light from escaping, turning the house into a tomb, sealed from the outside world. All 8 victims' faces are covered with clothing or bed linens, showing the killer's inability to confront the innocent eyes of his victims, even in death. The murderer then performs his most bizarre ritual. He takes a 4 5-pound slab of bacon from the icebox, wraps it in a dishcloth, and places it in the Stillinger girl's bedroom. Investigators will later theorize this was used for masturbation, the final degradation of the crime scene. The killer washes his hands in a bowl of water, leaving bloody evidence of his cleansing ritual. He may have eaten some food, as a plate of untouched food is found on the kitchen table. Before departing, he locks the door using a house key, sealing the horror inside like a cursed crypt. The murder weapon, Josiah's own axe, taken from the family's coal shed, is left leaning against the wall in the guest bedroom, a final mockery of the victims. The silence of dawn. At 5 a.m., as the first light of dawn touches the Iowa horizon, Reverend Kelly boards the westbound number 5 train at Villisca Station. To fellow passengers, he allegedly makes a chilling statement. There are 8 dead souls back in Villisca, Iowa. This, hours before the bodies are discovered. At the same time, 63-year-old Mary Peckham, the Moore's neighbor, rises early to hang laundry. She notices the Moore house is unusually quiet. No sounds of morning chores, no children playing in the yard, no smoke from the chimney. In a farming community where families rise before dawn to tend their animals, this silence is ominous. By 7 a.m., Peckham's concern has grown to alarm. The family should have been up for hours, but the house remains still as a tomb. She approaches the home and knocks loudly on the door. No response. She tries the handle and finds it locked, unusual for the Moore family who never locked their doors during the day. At 8 a.m., she calls Josiah's brother, Ross Moore, a local druggist, asking him to check on the family. Ross arrives within minutes, his own sense of dread mounting as he sees the drawn curtains and unnatural stillness. The discovery of horror. Using his copy of the house key, Ross Moore unlocks the front door and steps into the parlor. The house is tomb quiet, with an oppressive atmosphere that makes his skin crawl. He moves toward the guest bedroom and opens the door. What he sees will haunt him for the rest of his life. The bodies of Lena and Ina Stillinger lie on the bed, covered with sheets that are stained dark with blood. The bedstead is splattered with gore, and the smell of death hangs heavy in the air. Ross immediately retreats, his mind struggling to process the horror he has witnessed. He tells Mary Peckham, "Something terrible has happened. Call Henry Horton." Henry Hank Horton, Villisca's primary peace officer, a former carpenter with no formal police training, arrives shortly after 8:00 a.m. What he finds defies comprehension. 8 human beings bludgeoned to death with an axe, their heads beaten to unrecognizable pulp, their faces covered as if prepared for burial. Moving through the house like a man in a nightmare, Horton discovers all 6 family members upstairs, their bedroom looking like a slaughterhouse. The children's room is painted with blood, tiny bodies destroyed by savage blows. The master bedroom is even worse. Josiah and Sarah Moore are so mutilated that identification is difficult. Horton locks the house and delivers his grim assessment. There is somebody murdered in every bed. Don't let anyone inside. The circus of the damned. But Horton's warning proves futile. Within hours, up to 100 townspeople have trampled through the house, contaminating the crime scene beyond repair. Curiosity seekers handle evidence, move objects, and even take gruesome souvenirs. A piece of Joe Moore's skull, the size of a cigarette package, later appears in a local pool hall as a macabre trophy. By 10:30 a.m., the National Guard finally arrives to secure a perimeter, but the damage is done. The crime scene has been destroyed by the very people who should have protected it. Dr. J. Cooper arrives as the first physician on scene, conducting a cursory 15-minute examination. He estimates the murders occurred 8 or 9 hours ago, around midnight, and confirms that all victims were killed with the blunt end of an axe. The brutality is so severe that several of the children are barely recognizable as human beings. After 10 p.m., more than 14 hours after their discovery, the bodies are finally removed to the fire station, which serves as a temporary morgue. All 8 victims are transported there by 2 a.m. on June 11th, beginning a journey toward justice that will never be completed. The suspects emerge from shadow. As news of the massacre spreads across the nation, investigators converge on Villisca to hunt for the killer. Multiple suspects emerge, each carrying their own darkness, each capable of the unthinkable evil that destroyed 8 innocent lives. The Mad Minister. Reverend Lynn George Kelly becomes the prime suspect almost immediately. This English-born minister with piercing blue eyes and red hair stands only 5 feet 2 and weighs barely 115 pounds. But his small stature hides a mind consumed with madness. Kelly has been diagnosed with schizophrenia and has a history of voyeurism and sexual deviance. He had been caught peeping through windows and asking young women to pose nude. In 1914, he will be arrested for sending obscene materials through the mail while trying to sexually harass a potential secretary. Most damning of all, Kelly confesses to the murders in 1917, providing detailed knowledge of the crime scene that only the killer could know. He claims God commanded him to slay utterly, and speaks of following the shadow on the night of the murders. Kelly is left-handed, and crime scene analysis suggests the killer was left-handed based on blood spatter patterns. He left town on the 5:19 a.m. train before the bodies were discovered, and allegedly told fellow passengers about the 8 dead souls in Villisca, hours before anyone knew of the murders. But Kelly's small stature raises questions. Could this diminutive man have overpowered 8 people? 2 juries will ultimately be unconvinced, resulting in a hung jury in his first trial and acquittal in his second. The politician's vengeance. Frank Fernando Jones, 57, Iowa state senator and the most powerful man in Villisca, emerges as another prime suspect. This wealthy businessman had employed Josiah Moore for 7 years before Moore left in 1907 to start a competing business, taking the lucrative John Deere dealership with him. By 1912, the two men hate each other so intensely they cross the street to avoid meeting. Jones has both the motive, business rivalry and lost revenue, and the means to orchestrate the murders. Unsubstantiated but persistent rumors suggest that Josiah Moore was having an affair with Jones's daughter-in-law, adding personal betrayal to business hatred. The Burns Detective Agency investigator, James Wilkerson, builds a circumstantial case that Jones hired a hitman to eliminate the Moore family. Townspeople immediately suspect Jones on the morning of the discovery, and witness Alice Willard claims to have overheard Jones and William Mansfield plotting the murders. Jones loses his re-election to the state senate due to the murder suspicions and will never publicly express sympathy for the victims. He dies in 1941, taking his secrets to the grave. The Cocaine Killer. William Blackie Mansfield, an ex-convict and former U.S. Army soldier, becomes the suspected hitman in the Jones conspiracy. Detective Wilkerson describes him as a cocaine-addicted serial killer who uses axes as his weapon of choice. Mansfield's pattern of crimes is chilling. Blue Island, Illinois, 1914, murdered his wife, infant child, and in-laws with an axe. Paula, Kansas, June 5th, 1912. Axe murders just 4 days before Villisca. Aurora, Illinois, the Peterson and Miller Ax Murders, Colorado Springs, Colorado, 1911. Similar axe murders with identical staging. The signature behaviors are identical. Covered mirrors, oil lamps with chimneys removed, bloody washing basins, and the methodical positioning of victims. Witness R.H. Thorpe identifies Mansfield boarding a train at Clarinda the morning after the murders, claiming he walked from Villisca. But Mansfield has an ironclad alibi. Payroll records prove he was working in Illinois during both the Paola and Villisca murders. He successfully sues Detective Wilkerson for $2,225, equivalent to $65,000 today, for defamation, and is released by the grand jury when his alibis are verified. The Man from the Train. In 2017, researchers Bill James and Rachel McCarthy James proposed the most compelling theory yet. Paul Mueller, a German immigrant and itinerant lumberjack, is the true killer. Mueller had been the subject of an unsuccessful manhunt for the 1897 murder of the Newton family in Massachusetts, where he had worked as a farmhand. Mueller's physical description, short, muscular, skilled with axes, distinctive, small, widely spaced teeth, matches witness accounts from multiple crime scenes. The Jameses link him to a minimum of 59 deaths in 14 separate incidents over a decade-long killing spree from 1897 to 1912. The pattern is terrifyingly consistent. Families living near railroad tracks, midnight attacks while victims sleep, use of the family's own axe. Systematic covering of windows and mirrors, positioning of young female victims for sexual purposes, and immediate departure by train. Mueller's motive is sexual sadism, with a primary attraction to prepubescent girls. Adults are killed merely as obstacles to his true target. The bacon left at the Villisca scene is theorized to be a masturbation aid, used to gratify his perverse desires over the body of 12-year-old Lena Stillinger. The murders suddenly stop in 1912, suggesting Mueller returned to Europe. The researchers speculate he may have committed the Villisca murders in Bavaria in 1922, showing the same methodical staging and family annihilation. The House of Horrors awakens. For over 110 years, the house at 508 East 2nd Street has stood as a monument to unsolved horror. But those who venture inside soon discover that the terror of June 10, 1912, has never truly ended. The current owner, Martha Lynn, keeps detailed notebooks of visitor experiences, documenting supernatural encounters that would make even hardened skeptics question their beliefs. She admits, "I don't know if the murderer is still here, but things have happened that aren't exactly calming." The children who never left. Visitors consistently report the sounds of children's voices and laughter echoing through the house, particularly those of Lena and Ina Stillinger. The laughter plays over and over like a record, repeating the last night of the lives of the kids. EVP sessions capture children's voices, but never the adults, as if the murdered parents have found peace, while their children remain trapped in the house. Johnny Hauser, a local paranormal investigator who spent 15 years studying the house, had his most terrifying encounter while conducting an EVP session in the children's closet. He and a friend heard heavy footsteps downstairs that came up the stairs and entered their room. Hauser kicked open the closet door, expecting an intruder, but found no one there, only the oppressive presence of something that defied explanation. Motion detectors are triggered under beds with no visible cause, and toy cars change position on their own. Objects move throughout the house, and doors open and close without human intervention. The house that reads souls. Perhaps most disturbing is the belief that the house itself has developed a malevolent consciousness. Investigators claim, if you are a bad person, you have bad experiences. A good person, good experiences. It is as if the house reads you and messes with you. In 2014, this theory was put to horrific test when a visitor inexplicably stabbed himself in the chest during an overnight stay, making national news. The incident reinforced the belief that something in the house influences visitors' behavior, driving them to acts of self-harm or violence. Strange fog moves from room to room when trains pass through town, at the exact time the murders occurred, between midnight and 5 a.m. Shadows and apparitions are seen throughout the house, and electromagnetic fields are disrupted by unknown forces. The cat that knows. The house's resident cat, appropriately named Church, welcomes visitors but refuses to go upstairs, where the family was murdered. Animals, with their heightened senses, appear to detect the supernatural presence that still lingers in those blood-soaked rooms. Local residents who helped wallpaper the parlor in the 1980s returned the next day to find a big red blood spot on the new wallpaper for no reason, as if the house itself bleeds the memory of that terrible night. The Walking Dead. Professional paranormal investigators have documented evidence that the house remains active with supernatural phenomena. Ghost Adventures, Paranormal 911, and numerous other television shows have captured footage of unexplained activity. Richard Estep, host of Paranormal 911 and Haunted Hospitals, states, "There are some really bone-chilling stories. If any location in the world would be haunted, surely this would be the one." Spirit communication devices have given responses, including Struck, Reverend, and Kelly, when asked about the murders and perpetrator. suggesting that even in death, the victims may be trying to identify their killer. Mysterious scratches appear on visitors' backs from unseen entities, and people report being touched, pushed, and grabbed by invisible hands. The house has become a pilgrimage site for those seeking contact with the supernatural, with over 200 nights booked per year at $428 per night. Visitors must bring sleeping bags and are warned that the house has no modern amenities. Electricity and plumbing have been removed, forcing guests to experience the house much as it was in 1912. Those who stay the night report that the darkness itself seems alive, pressing against them with the weight of a century's worth of unresolved horror. The shadow that never dies. Today, 112 years after 8 innocent souls were butchered in their beds, the Villisca Ax Murders remain officially unsolved. The killer's identity died with him, taking the secret of that horrific night to whatever hell awaits those who slaughter the innocent. But the evidence points to a truth more terrifying than any single suspect. America was stalked by a methodical killer who rode the railroad lines from town to town, selecting families for elimination with the precision of a plague. Whether it was Paul Muller, the German immigrant with a taste for children's blood, or another predator entirely, the killer struck with the efficiency of death itself, leaving no witnesses, no evidence, and no hope for justice. The pattern is undeniable. At least 59 people died at the hands of this railway reaper, their families destroyed in midnight massacres that mirror the Villisca horrors in every detail. The killer covered mirrors to avoid seeing his own reflection, covered windows to hide his work, and covered faces to escape the accusation of innocent eyes. But some evils are too profound to be buried, too powerful to be forgotten. The house at 508 East 2nd Street stands as proof that certain horrors transcend death itself. The children's laughter still echoes in the rooms where they died. The parents' spirits still struggle to protect their young, and the killer's presence still lurks in the shadows, waiting for darkness to fall. Josiah Moore thought his success in business would protect his family, but wealth cannot shield against the kind of evil that walked into his home that night. Frank Jones thought his political power would let him orchestrate murder without consequence, but guilt follows the wicked even to the grave. Reverend Kelly thought God commanded him to kill, but madness is just another word for the devil's whisper. The truth is that evil needs no reason, no motive, no justification beyond its own existence. It rides the rails like a hungry beast, stops in peaceful towns like a plague wind, and destroys innocence like a force of nature. What happened in Villisca was not an aberration. It was a glimpse into the heart of darkness that beats beneath the surface of the American dream. And in that house where 8 souls died screaming in the darkness, where children's blood still stains the floorboards of memory, and where the killer's shadow still walks the halls, the horror continues. For some murders are so profound, so devastating to the natural order, that they tear holes in reality itself. The Villisca Ax Murders are not just history. They are a wound in the fabric of existence that refuses to heal. Every night when darkness falls, every time a train whistle echoes across the Iowa plains, every moment when a child laughs in an empty house, the echo of that June night in 1912 reverberates through time. 8 souls went to sleep on June 9th, 1912. Only their killer woke up the next morning. And somewhere in the space between life and death, between justice and vengeance, between memory and nightmare, the Villisca dead are still waiting for their story to end, but it never will. The dead of Villisca still wait for justice. But our journey into darkness doesn't end here. Subscribe and ring that bell to join me every week as we uncover history's most terrifying mysteries. Drop a comment. Which unsolved case keeps you up at night? If this story gripped you, hit that like button. It helps these forgotten souls reach more people who need to hear their stories. Next time, we enter a house where something even darker lurks. Until then, sleep tight if you can.